Okay, so will you tell us a little about the Centre for Applied Legal Studies?
So the Centre for Applied Legal Studies is a human rights organisation, and we have a bit of a dual identity in that we are simultaneously a law clinic registered with the Law Society, which means that we operate in the world of civil society and legal practice, but we are also a university entity housed in the School of Law at the University of the Witwatersrand, which means that all of our work is very much characterised by research activity as well. So we try and straddle these worlds of academia and practice. And we've been working on human rights issues for 35 years now. This year is our 35th birthday. And at the moment we have a number of different content areas of focus. Those include gender, basic services, education, the rule of law and the environment.
And what's your role in the Centre for Applied Legal Studies?
I'm the current Deputy Director of CALS, and my areas of practice and interest really relate to governance and administrative law and environmental justice.
And can you paint a picture for us of some of the activities that you do that touch on or directly relate to mining, particularly in the Northwest Province, in the sort of largely platinum mining region there?
So the environment program at CALS is, and has been since its inception, been focusing primarily on the mining industry. And the way that we come at those issues and our interest in them is really through a human rights lens, and with a particular focus on the community lived experiences of the mining industry. So how that translates into the work that we do is that we sometimes represent communities who are affected by mining activity. So for example, we have a current project where we're working with a community that is dealing with what post-closure mining looks like. So once the mine's pulled out and the community's left behind, really what that means for the community and what channels they have to try and address that. We've also been doing quite a bit of work around the Mapunkubwe World Heritage Site and the Vele Colliery Mine, which is built a couple of kilometres away from that World Heritage Site. And we represent a coalition of civil society organisations there, which is trying to protect the integrity of the region. And so that's really about trying to figure out what the nature of development is that is appropriate for a particular area, particularly an area which is as sensitive and as treasured as Mapunkubwe and its surrounds. And broader than that, we do quite a lot of work around local economic development in the mining industry and the roles that the various key stakeholders have to play in that development process. So looking at social and labour plans as a regulatory instrument, and how those are translating or not, as is often the case, into tangible benefit for communities who are affected by mining activity, either positively or negatively. Because I think that's an important part of the story. It's not about whether mining is a good idea, it's about whether mining is a good idea in a particular place and for whom, and ensuring that the way in which mining activity unfolds really maximises the benefit that activity can have for the variety of different stakeholders, including communities that are involved in that process.
And that's a very, very interesting area to focus on, all the different groups and how to get a sort of conversation where there's a kind of common vision and a common view of what the area should look like, should be like, should feel like. So what in particular are you sort of, what does that look like when you're engaging with those areas? What are you actually doing, and what are you hoping that it will achieve?
A lot of the time it's really about assisting communities to navigate their own responses to either proposed or existing development. It's an incredibly complicated industry with many layers of stakeholders and issues. And so really the role that we try and play is to assist communities with navigating that. So that, what really needs to happen is that all the stakeholders who are involved need to be in a position where they can make informed choices about the kind of development they'd like to see in a particular region and how they see themselves playing a role in that development. the reality is that communities affected by mining activity are really a long way, many of them, and most of them, in fact, from achieving that. Accessing the kind of information that you need to participate in decision making is difficult. The decision making processes themselves are often throw up a lot of challenges and barriers to access. Those kinds of decisions happen far away, in English, on paper. All of the kind of traditional, barriers of access to justice play out quite acutely here in the mining industry. In a context where the baseline is that natural resources are a common good. And so really there is a role for everyone and a right for everyone to be involved in decision making around those processes.
And what are some of the things that are, you said one of Kel's objectives is to look at like what sort of development is desirable and when and where and for whom, and what are the sort of things that you think are working at the moment? So what's in place that actually does work in mediating this inquiry and getting to the right answer?
Answering what's in place and what works is always much more difficult than answering what isn't in place and what isn't working, because it's a bit of a shorter list. There's certainly some very progressive, exciting movements at the moment, and I think at the heart of that is community mobilization. If there's one thing that South Africa is very good at, it's community mobilization, given our history. And so there are some really fantastic examples of that achieving quite positive change. And so it's not without its difficulties, because, as I say, the community attitudes to mining activity are complex and dynamic. But we're seeing a much greater degree of collective action amongst mine-affected communities. Networks being set up, communities starting to engage in things like community exchange, which is, I think, a really, really valuable tool here, because NGOs, the government, mining companies can go around on kind of roadshows till they're blue in the face, talking about what it might be like if a mine comes to your area. But really the best people to be doing that kind of experience sharing are people who have already been in that position. And so this idea of community exchange and communities visiting and learning from each other is really kicking off in quite a big way, and is very exciting to see.
And can you name any specific examples of where sort of this kind of community engagement, community mobilization, community exchange has kind of really led to a positive impact that wouldn't otherwise have happened?
Sure. I think just one of the most recent examples, just because I was involved in it earlier this week, is the existence and work of a community network called MEGCON, which stands for the Mining Environmental Justice Community Network. And MEGCON consists of a number of communities across a number of provinces in South Africa, so they're a national network that are affected by mining activity. They're a parallel sister network to something called MECA, which is the Mining Environment and Community Alliance, which is an alliance primarily of NGOs and other civil society groups working in the industry. And MEGCON is really, by this point, a self-sustaining entity. And so there's a steering committee which consists of the leaders of all of those communities. And they're really starting to share lessons about, this is what happened in our community, this is what we tried, this is why it worked, this is why it doesn't work. Maybe in your community you want to try doing X. And earlier this week we were at some hearings at the Department of Mineral Resources, where they were consulting about the amendments to the MPRDA Amendment Bill. And MEGCON was the only community there representing themselves. There was one other community group that was there, but they sent their lawyers to go and make their submissions. But MEGCON was there. They had put together their own submissions on the bill, and they were there to talk to them in person. And so it's really bringing community interests right into the heart of DMR decision making at policy level. And I think that's an incredibly impressive thing for them to have achieved.
And moving on to the things that are not working, I'm sure there's much that's not working at the moment. But perhaps from the experience of your work at the centre, the sort of the main stumbling blocks, systemic or practical, to getting to the desired result of just a proper examination of what sort of development you want, and then community involvement in putting forward their views on, we want this development or we don't, and this is how we would like to participate.
I think top of the list is probably the lack of an integrated planning strategy. We're starting to see attempts in that direction, with things like the National Development Plan and the work of the National Planning Commission. But really, on sort of if you take it down from the systemic level to the day-to-day reality of what this looks like, the permitting and authorization process for mining and other kinds of development is enormously fractured, and the way in which those decisions are approached are very much on a case-by-case basis. So you've got one department looking at the impact of one particular mine in one particular area, with very little, if any, consideration of the cumulative impact of 5 such applications next door to each other, and what and how that relates to a much more kind of regional or planning for the nature of development in a particular area. We have examples in South Africa of where that's a lot further down the road, in Mpumalanga, for example, and the extensive mining activity that's happened there. And there's a chance for us now, because we're at a critical moment in a number of different other places in the country, to really learn from lessons, good and bad, of how this kind of planning has been approached in the past. There's I think Limpopo and the Northwest are good examples of this, where there are increasingly new mineral deposits being found, and really it's about making sure. So what you've got on the one hand at the sort of higher strategic level is this acknowledgement that we need integrated planning, which takes into account the complexity of all the issues, but that's not filtering down to the implementation mechanisms, the permitting processes, mining rights, water use licenses, environmental authorizations, that kind of thing. So certainly I would put that in the category of things that aren't working. And I think the second major thing, which is still going to be quite an uphill battle, is around access to information on environmental and mining issues. That we're seeing CALS as part of a network, Promotion of Access to Information Act Civil Society network, that operates looking at access to information issues generally, but where that comes up most often for us is in relation to our environmental and mining work. And there are it's quite clear that both the state and the private sector is still not committed to, or not implementing the commitment to transparency that we see in our constitutional framework. It's incredibly difficult, even as a lawyer at an NGO, to be accessing documents that you need to be able to play a meaningful role in all of this decision making, let alone as a community member. And
in terms of sort of really moving things forward in the direction that CALS would like to see things go, is there a call to action that you have for other civil society groups, for the government, for traditional leaders, for mining companies themselves, that either collectively or individually or specific ones, where it would really make a difference to the outcome, where it's a kind of like something that you would like to see them do more of, and you would like to ask them to do more of, really?
I think that there's no magic here. This is not rocket science, and there are just very, very simple things, like everybody needs to talk to each other more. There's this range of stakeholders with various agendas, all streaming off in various directions, trying to achieve their own objectives. And there are instances of fantastic consultation and collaboration, but they're the exception rather than the norm. And I think the sooner we can all come together as a nation to understand what it is that we want to achieve and how each of us fits into that vision, the better. So definitely more talking, more of the time on everything. And that's both, I think that's both a sort of a general principle, but also something which needs to factor into the formalities of legislation and policy development and that kind of thing. And the second thing really is about long-term planning, that we really need to be, if we are to have any hope of achieving something like an environmental right which talks about the protection of the environment for current and future generations, then we can't leave the future generations part of it out of the picture. And we really need to be planning our activities in accordance with that we are here as stewards of the resources that South Africa has, and we have a responsibility not just to maximize profit and industry and development, but also to make sure that in 50, 100 years' time there's a South Africa that people want to live in.
Thank you very much.